You're not a real minimalist if you own more than one pair of shoes. A true minimalist would never buy souvenirs. If your closet isn't half empty, you're doing it wrong. You know, I've heard it all. But here's the thing about minimalism. It's a tool, not a religion. It's not about perfection, but about intention. It's okay to break the rules at times, especially if those rules make your life harder instead of easier. So today, I'm sharing 10 minimalist rules that I'm not afraid to break, and I'll tell you why. 1 in, 1 out. The 1 in, 1 out rule is pretty straightforward. Whenever you bring something new into your home, something similar you already own has to go. Buy a new pair of jeans? Donate an old pair. It's a simple way to maintain balance and prevent your possessions from slowly multiplying over time. And in most everyday situations, it works pretty well. But I've found that sometimes rigidly following this rule can actually work against the spirit of minimalism. Like when I moved in with my girlfriend, we bought this poof for our new home. And normally it's not on a coffee table, I just put it here so it would fit in the frame. But we didn't throw something else out to make space for this. We didn't have that many things to begin with, and I felt it added comfort and character. It elevated the space, it made it better, it didn't clutter it, and that's kind of the point, right? In Goodbye Things, Fumio Sasaki writes that minimalism, reducing the number of possessions that you have, is not a goal unto itself. It's about being intentional with what you own. It's a prologue for crafting your own unique story. And I fully agree with that. Also, life comes in seasons. There are periods when you need more tools for a specific project. Or maybe you start a new hobby like painting and you need to build a collection of paint and brushes to get started. What matters is that you're making conscious choices rather than mindlessly accumulating stuff. So while I follow the 1 in, 1 out rule most of the time, I'm not afraid to break it when doing so aligns with my deeper values. To me, minimalism isn't about owning nothing. It's about creating a life with more meaning and less distraction.
No just-in-case items.
Just-in-case items are things you keep not because you use them regularly, but because you think you might need them someday. In my experience, these items like random cables, instruction manuals, or kitchen gadgets, they take up valuable space and they're already used. As a minimalist, I want to be intentional about the things I surround myself with. Clutter is like an annoying roommate. It doesn't pay rent and it doesn't help with the household chores. I don't need that in my life. But sometimes this rule needs some flexibility. I have spare light bulbs, even though I might not need them for months. And I always have some paracetamol for headaches or colds. These aren't things I use regularly, but when I need them urgently. The key distinction I make is between unlikely what-if scenarios and predictable recurring needs. A spare umbrella isn't clutter if you live somewhere that gets regular rain. Minimalism should reduce stress in your life, not create it. It's about finding the right balance between preparedness and simplicity, not following rules so rigidly that you make life harder for yourself.
Be intentional about every minute.
Minimalism is a tool to be more intentional about what you surround yourself with and how you spend your time. As some minimalists, they take that to the extreme and they're trying to be intentional about every single minute of the day. That's not too different from how those productivity bros try to squeeze every ounce of efficiency out of their working hours. There's definitely value in being thoughtful about how you spend your time. After all, it's the one resource we can never get more of. But some days, I just don't have it in me. Sometimes I wake up and instead of tackling my carefully planned schedule, I end up sleeping in and scrolling through YouTube videos or watching a series on Netflix. Or I'll sit on the couch and stare out the window for 20 minutes, daydreaming, thinking about nothing in particular. We call that Nixon in Dutch. If you're a strict minimalist, I guess that will be considered waste of time. But what I've learned is that forcing myself to be intentional 100% of the time just isn't sustainable. Those unplanned, unstructured moments often give my brain and body the rest it needs. I'm not a robot, I'm a human, and sometimes I just need to do absolutely nothing and not feel guilty about it. Minimalism is about focusing on what matters, but sometimes what matters most is giving yourself permission to just be and do nothing. So while I try to be mindful about how I spend my time most days, I'm okay with breaking this rule if I feel my mind and body need a break.
No souvenirs.
When you're traveling, it can be very tempting to bring home all kinds of souvenirs. In some cities, you're just surrounded by shops selling bags with the city's name on them, keychains, fridge magnets, not made by a local craftsman, but made in China. Minimalism helped me realize that those mass-produced souvenirs can't truly preserve the essence of the experience. And a lot of the souvenirs that I bought in the past would just end up being dust collectors in my home. That said, I haven't gone completely souvenir-free. I make exceptions for items that generally enhance my daily life or ease the transition when I return home. For me, that mostly centers around food, like a local tea blend or artisanal chocolate from Belgium, or a ceramic mug, like I have one right here, that reminds me of my daily coffee that I would drink in this special cafe, or this small pebble I picked up at the beach. The key is being selective and intentional. I choose things that tell my story, that bring back happy memories when I consume or use them. I don't just buy something for the sake of having something to show for my travels.
Own minimal possessions.
So there's this idea, to be a real minimalist, you have to own as little as possible. Maybe even counting the number of possessions you have and keeping them under some arbitrary magic number. Yes, there are people who practice extreme approaches like the 100 Thing Challenge, where they limit themselves to owning just 100 items. But I've learned that minimalism isn't about having less for the sake of less. It's about creating space for more of what matters. When I tried extreme minimalism for 7 days, living in an almost empty apartment, I quickly realized that the law of diminishing returns applied. Less is more, but only to a certain point. Beyond that, life actually becomes more complicated again. I missed having a sofa, not just for comfort, but for practical reasons too. When I came home, I had nowhere to place my keys, and I couldn't invite friends over because there was nowhere for them to sit. And if you live with a non-minimalist or you have a family, limiting your possessions to an arbitrary low number is just out of the question. To me, minimalism is not a numbers game. It's not a competition to see who owns the least. It's a tool to create space for what matters most. I don't just live to survive, I also want to feel alive. And a bit of comfort is nice for that. The key is being intentional what you surround yourself with, what you spend your money on, and the information you take in. Sometimes that means owning more than what fits the stereotypical minimalist image. And I'm completely comfortable with that. I guess you could say I'm a casual minimalist. If you're not to minimalism and you think it sounds interesting, but you don't really know where to begin, you might want to check out my free How to Get Started with Minimalism checklist. There's a download link in the description below.
Borrow, don't buy.
There's a common minimalist guideline that suggests you borrow an item instead of buying it, especially if you only use it occasionally. You need a power drill for a one-off project? Just ask your neighbor. You want to read a book? Just go get one at the library. If you need party supplies for a birthday party, just rent them. This approach makes a lot of sense for reducing clutter and saving money on rarely used items. But I found that if you take this rule too far, it can actually create more complications than it solves. For things I use regularly, ownership simply works better than borrowing it every time. Like, I don't use a power drill that much, but it's nice to know that I have one when I need it. And I actually don't know my neighbors that well, so I don't feel very comfortable asking if I can borrow their power drill each time I need it. A middle way could be to buy a tool secondhand, use it, and then maybe sell it again a month later for about the same price that you bought it. I know people who do that. I think Nicole from According to Nicole has mentioned that in one of her videos. When deciding whether to buy or borrow something, I don't just think about how much space it will take up in my home. I also take into account how much time I will save by having it readily available. There's a peace of mind in knowing that it's right there when I need it. That's valuable. No awkward messages to friends, no coordinating pickup times, no worrying about returning an item on time. Minimalism should simplify your life, not complicate it with extra logistics. So while I'm happy to borrow things if I only use them once or twice, I don't hesitate to own things if I see value in them. It's not about owning as little as possible, but about owning the things that serve my actual life.
Not accepting gifts.
I've seen some minimalists take a hard stand on receiving gifts, politely telling their friends and family that they don't want to receive any physical presents, or when they do, they'll send them a detailed wish list of approved items. I understand where they come from. Gifts come with an unspoken obligation to keep them, even if they don't align with your needs or taste. And before you know it, your carefully curated, decluttered home fills up with well-intentioned clutter again. But I found that rigidly refusing gifts can sometimes cause more problems than it solves. I remember one time for my birthday, my brother gifted me a book about the Cosa Nostra, the Sicilian Mafia. Now, that book was not on my wish list. There were 2 other books on there, but somehow he decided to give me a book about the Cosa Nostra. So when I asked him about why he had bought that book for me, he told me that he had already bought it before I'd shared my wish list, and he kind of wanted to read that book himself. So he figured if he'd give it to me, he could then borrow it from me later. So, it was all good. I didn't really want that book, so I asked for the receipt and I actually went to the bookstore and exchanged it for one of the books I did want. And if it had been someone else, I would have just accepted the gift without hesitation and thanked them for it. I don't want to impose my minimalist standards on others and come across as rude. Now, there is a middle ground here, of course, around gifts, and I do maintain boundaries around what permanently stays in my space. Minimalism isn't about owning as little as possible. It's about being intentional with what fills your life. And sometimes the most intentional thing you can do is to prioritize relationships and find a balance in a way that respects the feelings of the giver as well as your values.
Digital books only.
I bought my first e-reader in 2013 when I went backpacking in Southeast Asia. Paper books are heavy. This is just one book and that's already a lot bigger than this e-reader. And imagine having 5 of these in my backpack versus, this tiny e-reader. It made a huge difference. And something I also really liked about an e-reader was that I could access any book I wanted to read just like this. Whereas if I wanted to read it as a paperback, then I either have to go to a bookstore and try to find it, and if they didn't have it, or I ordered it online, I had to wait for delivery. A final reason why I prefer the e-reader was that when I was done reading the book, it wouldn't take up any space. What was I gonna do with all these books that I'd finished? Since then, I've mostly read books on my e-reader. And one thing I like, similar to my backpacking days, is that my living space doesn't slowly fill up with all the books I read. Before, books would just stack up on my shelves and I would rarely reread them. I thought this was normal. My parents and also some of my friends have stacks and stacks of books they accumulated during their life. I don't think they ever get rid of any. But I found that strictly following the digital books only rule doesn't work for me. There's something about the physical experience of reading a paper book that really helps me disconnect and focus better. So sometimes I read a paper book. I love my 2 coffee table books, one about Japan and another with slow living interiors. I also like to have a few regular books lying around that have shaped my thinking. And honestly, I just enjoy the tactile experience of turning pages sometimes. Minimalism isn't about depriving yourself of experiences you value. It's about being intentional with what you keep.
50% full rule.
This is a minimalist guideline, I don't know if you've heard of it, that suggests keeping your drawers, your closets, your shelves no more than 50% full. The idea is that when your storage spaces aren't crammed, you can actually see and access what you have. You're not digging through piles to find that one shirt or kitchen tool you need. And it also creates a natural limit to how much you can accumulate. But I found that sticking rigidly to this 50% rule isn't always practical or necessary. It really depends on how much space you have. We live in a city apartment where space comes at a premium. We don't have an attic, pantry, basement, or garage, or any storage outside our apartment. We have to make do with the limited space we do have. So to then keep everything half empty would mean we need a larger and more expensive place. But that doesn't align with our financial priorities. Or we would have to sacrifice items that we actually use and need on a daily basis. So for example, our kitchen drawers, they aren't packed to the max, but they're definitely more than 50% full. But they're organized in such a way that everything has its place and is easy to find. For me, the spirit of this rule matters more than the exact percentage. The question isn't, is this drawer 50% empty? But rather, can I easily find what I need?
All or nothing.
Some minimalists adopt an all or nothing mentality. You're either a real minimalist who follows all the rules perfectly, or you're not a minimalist at all. I get these comments every now and then on my videos like, oh, you own more than 1 pair of shoes. You're not a real minimalist. This black and white thinking creates this idea that minimalism is a one-size-fits-all mold where you're trying to achieve some perfect state, rather than something you suit to fit your needs. But minimalism isn't some rigid ideology. I like to say that minimalism has minimal rules. It's simply a tool to help you live more intentionally, and you get to decide what that looks like for you. In some areas of my life, I apply minimalist principles more strictly than in others. My living space is pretty minimal. But if you take a look at my phone, you notice that my photos aren't organized at all. I just don't make time for that. I guess it's not a priority. Minimalism isn't about all or nothing, it's about the something in between. I'm not interested in minimalism as a performance or an identity. I'm interested in it as a way to help me live better. Some days I'm more minimal than others. And some areas of my home are more minimal than others. And that's completely fine. If you're feeling pressured to be a perfect minimalist, breaking this all or nothing rule might be the most minimalist thing you can do. because you're removing the unnecessary burden of perfectionism from your life. Besides breaking these minimalist rules at times, there are also bad habits I avoid as a minimalist. I made a separate video about that, which you can check out by clicking on the screen. So thanks for watching, I hope to see you on the next one, and take care, bye bye.